So it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you back to this weekend, this Tuesday, to the latest installation of Praxix. And tonight we have Deacon Rebecca Smith, who I am proud to say I knew way back when. So as a student at BKSM and now as a distinguished alumna of Bishop Kemper School for Ministry, who is a deacon in the Diocese of Nebraska, who has a particular call and vocation to prison ministry. And Deacon Rebecca, we are just so very glad to have you with us tonight to share whatever information and wisdom that you have for the group. So with that, I invite you to take it away. You've done this before as a receiver of Praxix. So welcome back as a sharer with us. We're just so glad to have you tonight.
Thanks so much, Mother Casey. I'm really glad to be here with you all. This is really fun for me to be able to see my old alma mater and all the students. And I know exactly what you're going through of worrying about getting your readings done and ready for class and all that kind of stuff and trying to just manage life. So I hopefully will be a good use of your time tonight. And if you think of any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat if you want, or save them until the end, and I'm happy to answer questions. My background has not always been in the church. I have always been a believer, but I had a kind of a different career path. I started out as a high school teacher for a while and then decided I really didn't care for that so much. So I went on to law school and became an attorney. And I did a lot of different areas of law, but one of the areas I did was criminal defense. And that was not something that I especially aspired to. In law school, that was, just one of the classes that I took. But when I started my own practice, you kind of take what comes in the door. And that's how you start to build up a client base. So I would get appointed by the court as like a public defender for different cases. And from time to time, I did prosecutorial work as well. I was out at the Winnebago Tribal Court as a prosecutor for about a year early on in my career. And so I've kind of seen it from both sides. And that's kind of what led me into doing a prison ministry, although I didn't think it was going to be a ministry at the time. It started out with when I'd go up to the jails to see my clients, to talk to them about their case and kind of get a feel for what kinds of strategies we'd use and what kinds of evidence we would need if we went to trial. The thing that was common among all of my clients was how much they missed their kids. And it was very sweet and tender to see that, but I could see they were really hurting. And that kind of stuck in my brain. And then God had some plans that I wasn't aware of at the time. And that was, he put a People magazine of all things in my hands. And this was 30 years ago. I didn't even have a subscription to it. I don't know if I got it at a doctor's office or what, but there was an article about a lady in Arizona that started a prison ministry with a reading program. And what she'd do is take in children's books and let the inmates read a bedtime story for their kid. And then she would send the recording out to the children. And I thought, well, that's really a good idea. The teacher in me was thinking, this is a good way to promote reading and maybe get some encouragement going to have reading continue when somebody's out of jail. And the minister part of me wasn't really too in tune with that part yet. And so this was 30 years ago, so I had a little backpack and I had cassette tape recorder because it was that long ago. And I got a bunch of used books from, the Goodwill and garage sales and anybody who I could talk into giving me a book. And I'd take the books up to Douglas County Jail, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, and just a little hike up the hill from my office. I worked with the programs director and we worked out that I would come in once a week and the inmates would be given a chance to be recorded reading a bedtime story. But I wanted the book also sent to the family, not just the recording. And I thought that would be kind of cool because then the kids could read along with the book and there would maybe that might have been the first book that child ever had as their own even. So I did that and I started this out just on my own. and kind of bankrolled it such as it was. It wasn't a whole lot of expense because it was used books. But the postage costs added up in time. In the first 3 years, I sent out about 1,000 books and tapes. And I was just doing this myself and just once a week. And after the first session or two, some kind of remarkable things happened that I think God had in mind. And that was when the inmates would read a bedtime story, they could say a little personal message before they read the book and after. And quite often they would cry because they missed their children so much. And that really kind of struck a compassionate chord in me. And it's a big deal when somebody cries in jail or shows any kind of weakness. And there would be anywhere from 3 to 10 inmates in a classroom with me at a time. And I was amazed at how supportive and kind they were to each other, because there was no making fun of anybody. And it didn't matter if it was men that were crying or women that were crying. There was always a lot of support. And they'd pass around the roll of toilet paper because we didn't have Kleenex. And they'd encourage the person to, you can do this and try again. And we sometimes stopped the recording and started over again and various things like that. And it just really kind of touched my heart. And God started putting words in my mouth. And I said, the shortest book verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. So if it's okay for him, I think it's okay for us. And at the end of their reading time, I would ask their permission if I could pray for them and their children. And that was a God thing too. And nobody ever told me no to that. And so I would pray at home in my private prayers for them, but I'd keep the children's name and the parent's name, or sometimes it was a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or something that was reading, and the child's first name and age. And I told them, I'm not going to put your child's age or name on any kind of documents or anything, but when I pray for your child, it will help me to visualize your child by knowing a first name and an age. Then I can think of a little boy or a little girl that's 7 years old or 3 years old or whatever. God knows who your child is, but that'll help me with it. And they were very touched and moved by that, and very excited to participate in this program. And it has been going on a little off and on for a few years, for about 30 years now. And I just love it. There's no better way to have a Friday afternoon than listening to some bedtime stories and seeing moms or dads or grandmas or grandpas excited about having something to send to their child and some hope in their life for something better. And over time, God put more words in my mouth. And that is, God loves you and he's here with you, even in this jail. And he's watching over you and he's watching over your children. And that really made a difference. Just those simple little words. And there was lots of different kinds of stories over the years. One time there was a group of maybe 10 or 15, maybe not 15, about 10 men that were in reading. And one of them was not very literate. And that was a problem with a lot of the readers. They just, even with children's books, that sometimes had problems with it. But I never corrected them or told them how to pronounce a word unless they asked me to, because this wasn't really about reading or pronunciation. It was about those family ties. And this one gentleman came in and he said, I want to send a book to my son, but I don't want to read it. And I thought, oh, maybe he's having trouble with reading. And I said, well, you don't absolutely have to read it if you don't want to, or you can read just a couple of pages. And he said, well, it's his birthday. And I said, oh, okay, well, you can send the book and tell him it's his birthday present. And he brightened up with that. And I said, if you want to, you can sing happy birthday to him. And he got a big smile on his face. And then he kind of looked around the room and saw the other men there. He's like, got a little sheepish. And I said, would you like it if we all sang happy birthday to your son? Oh, yes. So 10 big, burly, tattooed men and me sang happy birthday to a little boy that was turning 8 that missed his dad. And I'm sure that is something he will always remember. And I know his father will always remember it. And we get people in who, Oh, trying and reach out to sisters or brothers. If they're a young person, they might have siblings at home. Uh, I have a lot of grandparents that are incarcerated that want to reach out and touch their family, their child, their grandchild. We do have some screening things and some safeguards in place because we want to make sure that the children are always protected. So at Douglas County Jail, which is my main place that I've gone, they have what they call a life learning dorm. And that is a special group pod, basically, of people who want to take classes like GED classes and appropriate decision-making classes and parenting classes. And so they are brought in and can participate in those classes. And they're the ones who they would bring in for the reading. I also, because I am a criminal defense attorney, have access to the court system so I can look at the charges against the person. And I don't do that to snoop on them or anything, but I'm looking to see if any of them are charged with anything like child abuse, or if there's a court order that they aren't supposed to have contact with their children. And mostly they're fine for that, but every once in a while somebody comes in and they're not supposed to come in if there's a no contact order, but they're just desperate to have contact with their family, so they try sometimes, but I always have to check. When they finish reading the book, they can write a little message in the book for their child. And again, not to snoop, but just to safeguard the child, I always read the messages to make sure that they're appropriate. And out of all the thousands and thousands of books I've sent out over all those years, there was only one that was inappropriate, and it was somebody who was trying to be cute and send a book to her boyfriend. So that book didn't get sent, obviously, but it was just really nice to see how much they missed their families and how much it meant to them to have somebody see them as a person, not just a number, not just an orange jumpsuit, but a person, because they are. We think inmates, as soon as somebody's charged with something, they must be guilty and let's throw them in jail and throw away the key. That's not really what we're about. We're told very clearly in Matthew that among the things we're supposed to do is go and visit people in prison. And people are really scared to do that. And I get that. I never was, because my clients were always so glad to see me when I came in. I was always treated very well. And I always was through Read Me a Story program too. But I get that somebody who's never been in a jail before or visited somebody in a jail would be kind of intimidated by going in. And different jails are different levels of security. I've been to probably half a dozen or more different counties around for county jails. I haven't gone to a state penitentiary yet because they have their own reading programs there. But for the county jails, generally speaking, it's misdemeanor offenses, which means lower level crimes. So it might be something like shoplifting or drunk driving or an assault where somebody wasn't hurt real bad. Those kinds of things could be why somebody was incarcerated. It could also be any sentence that they would get would be less than a year, because if it was more than a year, that was a felony, and that's when they would go to the state penitentiary. So these weren't like horrible murderers or rapists or whatever, but there were people awaiting trial too that might have to wait many months before they could even go into court. And I think it's kind of important that we remember that the Constitution says innocent until proven guilty. And people have kind of very definite ideas about what makes a criminal and how we should treat them and how they must be awful people. And I'm sure there are plenty of them, but there's also people maybe like somebody who's been charged with a crime and then was found not guilty, or maybe some family member or a distant relative. And I don't think it's up to us to be judging. I mean, that's the court's job, and that's God's job. Our job is just to love them. And I think that's really a calling to us to do this. And I just absolutely love it. And every once in a while we get, a group of women and other women that are waiting their turns will do animal noises in the background if they're reading a book about animals or whatever, to kind of support each other and encourage each other. And it's just great fun. They get to pick out what books they want to read. Everybody gets one book per child. So if you have 3 kids, you get 3 books. And I can usually do about 8 to 10 people in about an hour and a half to 2 hour period that I'm there. And sometimes people have like a lot of kids, so they don't always get to read to all of the kids that first time, but they can come back in again and read up to 3 times. And I have to get the family contact information, the person who's taking care of the children, and their name and their phone number and their mailing address. And sometimes they don't know the mailing address, but they know the phone number kind of thing. And what I do is I call the person who would be receiving the book for the child. And I say, I'm Rebecca, I'm a volunteer at Douglas County Corrections. I met with Mary, and I use that person's name, and she read bedtime stories for Billy, Bobby, and John. So that they know I'm legit. That way I'm using the names of the actual people. And would it be okay with you if I sent books and the recording of her reading these books to you for the children? And I would say maybe 2 or 3 times over all the years, somebody would say no, because they just didn't want to have any contact with them for whatever reason. And I have to respect that and not send the book then. But for the most part, I was able to send it. And every once in a while, I'd find somebody who had a no contact order, or the child was like, say, present when a domestic assault happened or something like that. And unless the person who was receiving the book and had the children living with them said it was okay, I wouldn't send it then. And so there were some books that were recirculated back in after they had been read because it wasn't appropriate to send them. But by and large, it's been a really good thing. And once in a while, I hear back from the people who receive the books, and I've gotten some thank you cards over the time. And I've gotten, one time a mother called me, and she just needed somebody to listen to her. She had a daughter who was in her 20s, who'd always been a good kid. And then she got in with the wrong crowd, started taking drugs, started committing crimes to support her drug habit. And it was just breaking this mother's heart. And she just wanted somebody to listen to her. So I was glad that I could do that for her, because that's a big part, I think, of what ministry is, whether it's Presbyterial or presbyteral, or diaconal. It's connecting with people. And sometimes the best way to connect is to just listen to them. So that's kind of what my ministry has been like, and I just love it. And I'm always looking for volunteers. And if you live someplace elsewhere, you can start your own program if you want to. And I would be glad to give you pointers on how to get started. And it will mean a lot to people. And I've gotten donations from, family members and friends and chaplains at the jail and individuals who were, and when they finished their sentence, wanted to contribute. So I got money for more recording supplies or for books or for whatever. And one of the coolest things I got was for my ordination party. A lot of people brought me books and stuff for the program, and that was the best. So, but that's my program. It's called Read Me a Story. And my goal is to try and contact all of the counties that have jails in them and see if I can't get a church in that community to work with me, because obviously I can't go out to Valentine, Nebraska every week, but I can maybe get something started, and then they can go in and see. It's not so scary. These are moms and dads, and yes, maybe they did something wrong, but it's not us to judge them. It's other people to judge them, and not anything that we need to be doing. So that's my story. Any questions, anybody? Excuse me.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said you started with cassette recorders and cassette tapes. What do you use now?
After a while, when people didn't have cassette tapes much anymore, I used audio CDs, but those are now kind of out of the loop too. So now I have a little recording device. I'll hold it up so you can see it here. It's just small. It's like the size of a small remote recorder or TV remote control, and it records the person speaking. I can't bring in a laptop or a computer. That's not allowed. but I can bring in this kind of a recorder and excuse me, goodness. Then I'm able to record like a WAV file. And then there's a cord that attaches to this that I can then connect it to my computer and save the WAV file either to burn to an audio CD if people want that, or it's starting to be more common now that they want me to send it in an email to them. And then
That's what I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have any obstacles when you started this that you had to overcome?
Yeah, a lot of jails didn't want me to come. And it took some talking. And jails are just like any other government entity, I think. They have their own bureaucracy and their own rules, and they don't like change much. But if I could get somebody who is in charge of programs or something to see this could help them. It wasn't going to be just a nuisance for them to have to gather up inmates and then take them back to their cells, but that this might give them, the inmates, something to be looking forward to and to be happy about, and that they'd be thinking of something other than, you know, the system and the crimes that led to them being in there. I'm not kidding myself that reading a bedtime story is going to stop recidivism, but I think it does help. And of course, there's long waits because nothing happens fast in the jail. So I get there at, say, 3 o'clock, or I get there at like 1 o'clock and stay till 3. And you have to be out at 3 because that's when shift changes for the guards. And if I come at 1 o'clock, it might be 1:30 before anybody came down to the lobby to escort me up to the room. And sometimes they didn't have readers, but most times they did. And I tried to get people to sign up ahead of time so I could do their background checks ahead of time too. And that way I could say, I'm really sorry, but you can't read because there's no contact order, or because you're prohibited with having any contact with any children at all. Maybe it was a sex offender or something like that. But for the most part, especially after I got going with the prisons and jails, we're very supportive and happy about it for the most part.
I've got 2 questions. The first one is, what has your experience been like as you've tried to help grow or branch out this program to other jails and other locations where you cannot be, and involving churches? What has been your experience in that, and what have you learned along the way?
Good questions. I'm asked to speak a lot to different groups, to ladies' book clubs, to Daughters of the King group, to just different congregations. I've preached a few times at other churches about Read Me a Story program. And one of the goals of that was hopefully that somebody would volunteer to help. And there's lots of different ways to help. You don't have to go into the jail. There's some processing that goes into getting the books ready to mail and the envelopes addressed and getting them to the post office and all of that, getting the recording made or sent off, and calling the family to make sure it's okay to send. So there's different things that can be done. And people love to donate books, which is wonderful. But I have kind of a lot of books right now because during COVID, I couldn't go in. There was a big time period where I could not go in at all. Then COVID kind of let up a little bit and I could go in for a little while. And then it started up again and I couldn't go in. So there's been some kind of setbacks that way. A lot of times people want to donate money, which is very much appreciated because the postage, even sending things media mail, which is cheaper, is still pretty expensive. I would say most families that I send out to, it's like $3 or $4, something like that per package of book or books, depending on how many there are. And I try not to get the really big or really thick books because that makes it more expensive. But that's some of the obstacles in talking to jails. You have to be very diplomatic and very patient about things. And sometimes it takes going back again and again and again, or calling again and again and again to get in the door. And some jails are much more receptive than others, but usually I can get in. I'm pretty persuasive. So, and with trying to get other churches involved, again, mostly what people want to do is to donate books, which is lovely and very helpful. But what I really need is bodies to be able to go into the jails, to be able to make this really spread. And at last annual council for Nebraska, I did speak to the clergy that were there and said, look, this is what I need. And can I come and talk to your congregations? And, and a number of people did sign up for that. And I'm hoping to be able to get out to more of them. Right now, my career path has got me kind of tied in knots a little bit. I'm closing down my law practice. I'm retiring, but that is a process, and it's a very long process to get that done. I'm also working at 2 different chaplains facilities in hospitals and taking CPE classes. So, and I'm an old lady, so there's only so much energy to go around. So I haven't been able to do as much as I would like to, but there is some interest, and the jail has contacted me that they would be interested in having me teach a parenting class. And I'm hopeful, like maybe next spring, I'll be able to do that when things are a little bit more calmed down in my life. So, but yes, I really try and encourage people to, and people are getting better about it. I've had several people say they would go into the jails, and for Douglas County, there's like an application form, and they do a background check on you. And then they have you come in for one, I think it's a 3-hour session of teaching you volunteers about how to behave properly in a jail, and things that we might not necessarily think of right off. Like, oh, sometimes an inmate will say, can you call my mother for me? Well, that sounds like a nice thing, but you're not supposed to do that. If inmates are supposed to call, they have to call themselves. And that's very unfortunate because it costs a lot for somebody who's incarcerated to make a call. It's like $1 a minute to do that. And they can only do it when there's time and a phone available to them, which is not all the time. So, or they might say, could you tell my mother such and such message when you mail this out to her or whatever? We're not supposed to do that. And there's some kind of odd things, I think, too, for dress code. They want you to be very well covered up. Not that I'm not a covered up kind of person anyway, but I remember one time I went into the jail after I had come from court, and I was dressed up in a suit, and I had on dress up shoes, but they were peep toe shoes. So the toes showed a little bit. They didn't like that. My little chubby toes were too much, apparently. So they made me get a paper towel from the bathroom and cover my toes. And I thought, I don't care, as long as I get in there to do the reading, that's what's most important. So, and you're not supposed to, wear a lot of jewelry or kind of things that should be obvious, but maybe not be automatically, like you don't give out personal information about yourself or your family or your address or your phone number or anything like that. So when I mail out the books, I put a return address of my law office rather than my home address. And now that my law office is getting closed down, I have a post office box. I know some people that have used like their church address rather than their home address, because, as much as we are to love one another, we also have to be cautious about some things too. And that means, not bending any of the rules from an institution. And some are much more particular about things than others. I've been to some jails that they made you walk through a metal detector, and then you get patted down, and then they want to see everything that's in your bag. And I've been at other ones that are like, yeah, come on back. And they never want to see what I'm doing or anything. And one of them even said, oh, it's okay, you can bring your umbrella with you. I'm like, really? So, but yeah, the different rules are different places, and the smaller towns tend to be a lot more relaxed because I think a lot of the jailers know the people from the community that are being incarcerated there. And it's just the way it is, I guess. So I don't know if I totally answered your question, Casey.
Totally. Thank you.
With the books, I have a wide variety of books. I have some like holiday books, like we have Halloween and Valentine's Day and Christmas. and some from other religious backgrounds for their holidays. Those are all very popular. Of course, like the Dr. Seuss books are always a big hit. And sometimes they're new books and sometimes they're used books. I really like it when it's a book like I read to my daughter when she was little. And I tell the person who's reading that, and they like that. Or I try to find some way to connect, like, oh, there was one lady whose name was similar to a friend of mine's name. And I mentioned something like that to her. And then when I asked her if I could pray for her and her children, she said, yes, and I'll pray for you too. And I said, that would be great. Thank you. Because that is what we want to see is people praying. And sometimes when people are incarcerated, they don't have anything else to hang on to at all for any kind of hope. And if we can give them the hope in the Lord, that's a pretty big deal. Everybody's shy.
I had a question about how your prison minister, your criminal defense attorney, and then starting the prison ministry, and then how does your call to the diaconate come into that? Like trying to figure out the chronology and turn of
Well,
events.
God had some very definite plans for me that I wasn't aware of. I had no intention at all of going into any kind of ministry. Even when I started the Read Me a Story program, it kind of developed as one. And I'd been doing things like, some lecture readings and stuff in my church from time to time. And at one point, a priest and a deacon both said to me, hey, what do you think about going and becoming a deacon? And my comment was, you gotta be kidding me. I swear too much. So they said, just pray about it. So I prayed about it. I prayed an awful lot of, are you really sure you want me to do this, God? Because I don't know that this is such a great idea. But God thought it was. And he convinced me over time. And one of the things that made the biggest difference to me was I was blessed to be able to take a trip to the Holy Land. And right before I went, I'd been saving up airline miles and hotel miles from a job I had where I traveled a lot at that point. I had used those times to be able to afford the trip, basically, because it was like about a 14-day trip. And I went to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. Right before that, the company that I was working for, which was a company that does voting machines, and I'd travel around to teach voting offices and election officials how to use the equipment, which is how I got the points for it. They decided to do a downsizing, and they got rid of everybody in the training department, including all my coworkers, peers, and my boss. And so I found myself unemployed all of a sudden in 2013, which was not a good time to be unemployed. If you remember, it was very, very hard to find jobs then. And I really debated as to whether or not I should still go on this trip. So I thought maybe I need to, back out and try and get my money back or whatever amount of it I could get back, because I don't know how long I'm going to be unemployed. And I really agonized over that and prayed over that for a long time. And my sister kind of talked me into it. She said, this is a once in a lifetime thing. And magazines seemed to play a big part of my family life too. She had read in a Reader's Digest, I think it was, about a woman who had been in somewhat similar circumstances. She planned a big trip to the Holy Land. She had saved for it for a long time. It had been a dream of hers forever. And right before she'd lost a job, no, she hadn't lost a job, her husband died. That's what it was. And so she really wasn't sure she should still go and really agonized over it. And she prayed about it and she finally decided to go. And when she came back, she became a minister. And I thought, well, I'm not going to come back and be a minister, but let's see what happens. And God changed my life in the Holy Land. I was able to climb to the top of Mount Sinai, where Moses was with the 10 Commandments and the burning bush. And it was quite an ordeal for an old lady. It took me a long time. And it was with other people too. And when I got to the top, I took off my shoes and socks and stood barefoot on the holy ground, just like Moses did. And I just felt God right there with me. And that made all the difference. And it changed my life. The whole trip did. I went to the Jordan River and got baptized. I got to see Bethlehem. I got to see Golgotha, and Garden of Gethsemane, and all kinds of places. And it struck me, this is real. This is very real. This is not just some old wives' tale or stories that are made up. This really happened. Jesus walked here. His disciples walked here. And I just kind of felt myself falling in love with going into ministry at that point. That was a long answer, sorry.
No, thanks. That was great. Wonderful. Thank you.
So anyone interested in starting out a little read me a story program in your local community? All you got to do is call up to the county jail. They'll be thrilled to hear from you. Get some used books, get a recording device. You can be
I saw Lori Mills raise her hand.
All right.
Do you actually have, Deacon Rebecca, do you have, maybe that's not why she was raising her hand. Maybe she had a question. I just announced, so maybe that is not what that's about, but do you have like training guide, like materials, like process guidelines? Have
I
you?
do. I have little notebooks that I put together of kind of general rules of thumb of things like, this is not about the reading, it's about the people. So, don't necessarily feel like you have to micromanage the reading parts of it. That's whatever it is. And here's how you apply it at this particular jail. And here's what you need to bring in and what you need to do or not do and say or not say, kind of along the lines of what I just discussed tonight. And for anybody that goes in with me, I now have one person from my church that goes in real regularly. I had another lady for a while, and now there's 2 or 3 more that are interested. And I'm really hoping to be able to get this taking off a little bit more, because for many, many years, it was just me. And then my sister joined me for a little while, and then she ended up moving away. So it's just, I never really thought about like recruiting other people for the longest time. I just thought, well, nobody else is going to want to do this, but sometimes maybe they will. So if God moves them to anyway.
I just think what you do is incredible. And I was a teacher. I'm a retired teacher. And I taught in an area for quite a while where it wasn't uncommon to have kids whose parents were incarcerated. And I just know how much it meant to them. I know at Christmas time, one of the facilities would take pictures of the parent and send them to the children, and they would bring them and put them on their desk. And, because it meant so much to them. And it's just so good in so many ways, because we know the more children get read to when they're small, the better they do in school. So yes, I would love to learn more about how you put this all together. And then there's a deacon in Wichita who does prison ministry. So I thought, well, maybe I can find out from him.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information in the chat.
Okay.
So if anybody needs to get hold of me, you're welcome to.
I was just going to add, one of the nice things about your program is that you're working with county jails.
Yes.
And a lot of the prisons and jails at higher levels are closing down their access to the public. We had a really nice prison ministry here in Iowa that was jointly done with the Episcopalians and Methodists in women's prison, in the state women's prison, and they won't let them go in anymore. So I like this, that you're working with the county jails and with men and women. It's very nice that it's a program that is for either gender as well. So I'm interested in knowing more about it.
Well, I'm typing in rather slowly because I don't type very well. But there we go. I got my address and phone number there, and Casey knows how to get hold of me too. And if you want to give me a call or write to me or email me or something, you're very welcome to do that. And I promise I'll respond.
A question. You were so, excuse me, you obviously had a little bit of a foot in the door and knew who to contact in the jail to get permission to do this. But and you mentioned the role of activities director or program director.
Programs director, yes.
Do most county jails have someone performs that function, whether
It kind of
titled
depends on
that?
the size of the jail. Like Douglas County Jail, which is the largest county here, and Lancaster County, which is Lincoln, and Sarpy County, which is a suburb of Omaha. Those all have very big jails and usually have a number of people. But basically, if you just call up to any county jail and say, I'm interested in doing a program, they will let you know who you need to talk to. You know, it might be the sergeant, or it might be somebody who's, you know, in charge of running the jail. Sometimes it's a captain or whatever. And just be persistent. I mean, you have to be polite, but persistence helps, because there's a slow chance of change in any kind of government institution, and you just have to kind of make them understand this can be a good thing for everybody. So, and I'm happy to throw in my 2 cents worth. If you ever decide you want to get into a jail and having some difficulties, I call them up for you too. Anyone else?
So talk a little bit about, so you went through the 2-year diaconal studies program at BKSM, and talk maybe a little bit about how this work, this ministry in the prison informed your call and shaped your call to the diaconate, and whether or not or how, now that you are through and have a collar around your neck, that you see that ministry any differently. Like, so what's sort of the relationship between the two?
That's a good question too. While I was at BKSM, we did several classes on social ministry and social justice. And one of the things that we were encouraged was to think of how we wanted to become the bridge between the church and the community, and the community and the church. And I thought, well, this is kind of a way to be a bridge. And I started talking about it, and my classmates were very interested, and the teachers were very interested. And that made me think, well, maybe lots of other people would be too, if I was able to kind of get the message out a little bit. Let's see. Forgot what else you asked. I'm sorry.
Like, do you see your ministry in the prisons any differently now that you are ordained? Or do you think it's just a fuller, like, has there been any metamorphosis or change or transformation within you as you have entered into this world of ordained life?
Sometimes wearing a collar is a good thing for people, and sometimes it's not a good thing for people. So I don't wear a collar when I go into the jail. And when I go to do the hospital chaplaincy things, I very rarely wear a collar, because it puts some people off. And, but as far as my personal feelings is, I do tell sometimes people that I'm ordained, and they've been very, very supportive of it, whether it was through chaplaincy work or read me a story. And that's very heartwarming to see that. And I think my becoming ordained did make it a little easier for me to talk about spirituality, and God loves you and you're not alone, and I care about you and God cares about you and he's watching over your kids. Those things seem to come more and more easily for me now that I've been through BKSM and got ordained. You know, just compassion and empathy goes a long way in selling the Lord. You don't have to do any Bible thumping or anything else. Just live like a child of God, and people will see it, and they'll see the joy in your face, and they'll want to know more.
I really appreciated your insight in terms of with or without collar and chaplaincy. I'm a full-time chaplain here at the local hospital, and we have four for a small hospital, having 4 full-time chaplains is pretty amazing.
Mhm.
But we've had this discussion from time to time. It's a very traditional community in Northeast Nebraska. And 3 of us feel more comfortable with the collar because most of the patients are older and have a vague Roman Catholic or Missouri Synod background. So we find that it opens more doors than it closes, but our younger colleague does not. And so we kind of deploy the appropriate person based on their background. So you're sharing that in that prison context was just kind of very affirming of the discussions that we have periodically here. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story into ministry as well as into the diaconate.
Thank you. When I was thinking about wearing my collar, because I'm newly ordained, you want to wear your collar all the time. And it does help a lot at the grocery store. I stop after church sometimes. And I got into the emergency department when a friend of mine was taken in very suddenly because I went right from church and had my collar on. And because they wouldn't have let me in the emergency department, it's just a friend. So there is times that it does help more. The hospital that I work at is Nebraska Medicine, which is a big hospital. It has about 800 beds or so. And there's a lot of chaplains, some on call like I do, and some that are full time. And my spiritual director had said, who also did chaplain's work, that she didn't think that it was helpful as a woman to wear a collar. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe I won't. And then one night I decided I was just going to try it. And there was a colleague of mine who was an ordained priest in the Episcopal Church. And he was wearing a collar that night. So I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and wear mine. And a young Catholic patient had asked for a priest. And I was shadowing him. And when she saw a woman in a collar, that did not go over very well. So she just like, no. So I backed off, and I felt kind of bad because even though my colleague was an Episcopal priest, she might have thought he was a Catholic priest, unless that topic came up, and been more open to, some kind of spiritual care at that point. But, God opens the doors where they're supposed to be. So I'm not against wearing the collar, although they are a little choky sometimes. But I really like wearing the collar and serving at the altar too.
I thought your story was really inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing it. I think like the neatest thing I found was just how bright your spirits are, despite probably seeing a lot of darkness. I imagine that it's probably at times, maybe I imagine you have built in or things you've discovered that have been helpful to kind of keep your candle burning bright and your spirits up, despite kind of bearing witness to probably a lot of darkness and suffering. I'd be curious to know kind of like what things you do kind of for self-care to help with that. And then also to hear kind of how, if you've had any challenges kind of coming to the ministry in like one role, and then like with having your law background as well, if it's difficult to kind of uncouple the role you have through your ministry with that background, where people will try to maybe tap into that resource or that knowledge base as well.
Sure. Well, in practicing law, I practice in other areas besides criminal defense. I do bankruptcy, and I do family law, which is custody battles and divorces and stuff. And all of those areas are very emotional for the client. They're uncomfortable with having to go through it. There's a lot of emotions that come up. And through the years, I would quite often have clients that would cry in my office. And long before I ever got into any ministry, I still felt empathy for them. And I would try and, listen and, pat their hand or say something appropriate. When I got in the process towards becoming a deacon, it felt a little bit more comfortable sometimes to say to people, I know you're going through a lot of really sad, hard things. And when I go through hard things, one thing that helps me is to pray. I don't know how you feel about it, because you don't want to be like the lawyer says, I've got the Lord for you here, kind of thing, and shoving it down people's throat. But you can approach it. God kind of gives like a little wink of this person might be a little bit interested in that. And I just say, and so that if they say yes, then I say, is it okay with you if I remember you in my prayers? And most people say that. I've had people who were sitting around the conference table crying, and I'd say, can I pray for you? And they stood up and held my hand, and we prayed right there, which surprised me. But it was wonderful that, God opened that door for that. So, but I don't routinely tell people, like in the legal community, that I'm ordained. I have a few close friends that I share that with. And as far as clients, I would get to know some of them more personally over a period of time. And sometimes if I felt close enough, I would share that I was going through the process to become ordained, and they were very excited about it and wanted to know updates on it and things like that. And so there's times that it's appropriate and times that it's not. I mean, I would never wear my collar into court. I was in a trial today, and I thought, boy, the judge probably wouldn't be too thrilled if I came in a collar and the opposing counsel didn't have one. I thought I should have some kind of advantage or something. But I do tell people, when I feel it's appropriate. And as far as self-care, that's something I struggle with sometimes. I have a lot going on in my life. I'm working a full-time job, law, trying to end that, but it takes time because I have to finish up the cases I already have, and some of them are ongoing. And then I have to sometimes tell people I'm not taking on any more cases because I'm going to be retiring. And that's hard for people, especially if I get repeat business. And in addition to that, I started out as one part-time job at University Hospital, and my hours weren't very much, so I moved on to Children's Hospital. And I wasn't too sure about going to Children's Hospital because I thought, I'm only going to handle this with a very sick child or a child that dies. And it turned out to be a real blessing, and God gave me what I needed to be able to do those things. But that was, so I had basically the equivalent of 2 part-time jobs and a full-time job, and I'm old. and I'm trying to read me a story, and I'm trying to do CPE. And I thought, really, you need to understand sometimes you have to take care of yourself. So one of the things that I was doing just today was something I'd been encouraged to do for a while, is to say no to some things and to have a no journal of how did I feel when I said no to people about something? How did I handle it? How did they handle it? And sometimes it was something as little as, sorry, priest, I'm not going to be able to make it the staff meeting tomorrow. I have too many other things going on. Sometimes it was, I can't take on your case. Sometimes it was contacting the jail saying, I would love to do the parenting class, but I can't do it until I'm done with CPE. There's just too much going on. And knowing when to say no is a skill I'm trying to acquire. But I think that's something that is very common amongst people who go into the ministry. So we want to help everybody. We want to be there for everybody. But there's one of us. And if we burn ourselves out, we aren't able to give anything to anybody. So I do try and go on retreats as often as I can. I do try and have somewhat of a praying Bible reading schedule to some extent. I try to stop working by at least 6 o'clock every night. And that sometimes is hard to do because when you're self-employed and a lawyer, there's always lots more to do. But if I don't, then I really do get burned out. And sometimes I have like overnight shifts on call as chaplain. And it's a little tricky because sometimes you get called a lot and sometimes you don't get called at all. And so you just have to kind of say, okay, what's the one thing that I'm going to do now? Lord, tell me what one thing I need to do. Okay, I need to go take a shower and get dressed. Then I'll think about the next thing. I'm not going to be able to finish the book for Rector's Book Club this month, so I won't be coming, but it's not the end of the world. There'll be other people there. So taking care of yourself is really important. Is good nutrition, getting some rest, saying no sometimes. and making sure you have time alone with God, I think is probably the best energizer that there is. So, long answer for a short question.
Thank you so much for sharing all that.
There's a group I belong to called Daughters of the King, and they're sort of prayer warriors for the church. And they have a motto, and what part of the motto says, Lord, I cannot do everything, but I can do something. What will you have me do? And when I find myself trying to do 15 things at once, I pray that, and it helps. Because God understands our human limitations. And I don't want to do things halfway. If I'm going to take on a project, I want to really give it my best. And I can't if I'm overly tired, supposed to be in 2 different places at the same time, that kind of stuff. So self-care is really important. And I'm sure all of you have those same sort of experiences with BKSM and balancing homework and family life and maybe another job and all kinds of things that you have as stressors trying to get everything done. Just remember to take some time for yourself. Have a Sabbath. Have at least a half a day, if not a whole day, where you don't do anything. And that can build your strength back up again.
Being a fellow Nebraskan, which is your home parish?
I'm at St. Augustine of Canterbury. It's in Elkhorn.
Oh yeah, I've been there. That was the first Sunday I came back into the Episcopal Church after 25 years away.
Awesome. Awesome. Was Father Mark Selvey there at that time? Do you remember?
No, it was still the last interim before Father Ben arrived. So it was the Sunday before he got there.
Oh, okay. So you probably saw our interim priest. It was, her name escapes me.
It wasn't Mother Ruth. It was.
I know who you mean. I just can't think of the name. It's late in the day. I'm old. But yeah, it's nice. It's a nice church. I started going there. This was kind of another God thing. I was going through a divorce, which was very painful. And I had a counselor that I would talk to. And I said, I've been looking for a home church for a while. And she said, oh, my brother is an Episcopal priest. And sometimes he fills in here at this little church out in the country. And it's not really out in the country anymore. And they have these beautiful stained glass windows. And it's just a nice small congregation. Should try going out there. I went, and that was 10 years ago. So God has all kinds of plans for me that I noticed after the fact. That was really smart that you put that People magazine in my hands. I don't usually read that. How did you know to send me to that therapist who would send me to that church, which led me to go into ministry eventually? It's kind of amazing when we kind of put those pieces of the puzzle together. I didn't know that God put them together long before we even knew there was a puzzle. And, even though I have a very busy life and lots of things going on, I do feel incredibly blessed when I'm able to help somebody who's in need, to encourage a mother that's going to be incarcerated for the next 6 months, to sit with a patient or a patient's family when they're dying. You know what that's like. I was actually able to do an emergency baptism for a stillborn child. And it was very sad. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it. But I prayed before I went in, and my voice only cracked once. And it was good. And, those holy moments that God gives us are what makes it all worthwhile, really.
So you started this ministry kind of on your own, separate from work in the church, right? So.
Yeah. But God knew what I was going to be doing.
God did, right? Like, wow, it can happen all sorts of ways. But I think for many, either, at any order of ministry in the church, there we might have a dream or an inkling or a nudge that we are to sort of take some uncertain steps into a particular sort of mercy ministry or advocacy or whatever. So what advice might you have for people if they're dreaming some new dreams?
Be listening for what God's going to lead you to and see what appeals to you. Maybe your thing is feeding the hungry. So, maybe he'll lead you to a food bank or a food pantry. Maybe your thing is helping the homeless. Maybe your thing is music and you're supposed to lead a choir or something. There's all kinds of things. There's ministry for creation care and just about anything you can imagine. Keep an open heart, a loving heart, and listen to where God is taking you and see what excites you. And that's what you should be doing. Thank you for your nice notes in the chat. I appreciate that very much. And I'm so glad I was with you guys tonight. And I'm looking forward to leading Compline when it's time and being able to spend some time in prayer with you tonight too. And I will be praying for all of you because I know school can be tough and it can be overwhelming sometimes, but it is so worth it. It gave me the things that I needed for my toolbox to be able to go forward. And BKSM is a really wonderful place. You're in a good place and God brought you to a good place. So when you're out writing your paper at midnight and thinking, I don't want to do this, remember God brought you there. So, don't take it for granted. Just do it. Are we ready for Compline now?
Sure. That sounds great.
And if you happen to have your Book of Common Prayer handy, I'm going to start on page 127 in order for Compline.
And would anyone like to serve as the respondent tonight on behalf of the group? Karen, thank you. Everyone else can stay muted until prayer time.
Thank you.
I may have to mute just in case you hear a dog because